Our React application is rendering data from the server using JavaScript. But what happens if we don't have JavaScript? We can actually disable JavaScript completely here. Let's try. If we refresh, our application is empty. In fact, the only thing that it renders is the original content that we rendered to our EJS template. This is exactly what most search engines see if they request the application. We'll simulate that with a curl, localhost, port 8080, and the only content that they see is that. Ideally, we want this command to also render our application as seen by React, so that we get the benefits of search engine optimization, and also we get a little bit of performance benefit. Instead of waiting for React to warm up, render the component, and then go back to the server to fetch the data, we can have an initial view ready by the server. So to do that, we're going to have to modify this code here to pre-render all the React components on the server using the same data that we have in the API. However, remember that we're doing all the different parts of this project in a single node application, but we're going to consider them separate. So I'm going to consider that React application is separate from the API application. So I need this server code to be able to read data from the API part. Let's create a new file. Call this file server render.js. And in this file, we're going to fetch the data from the API, assuming that this part does not have direct access to the data and it needs to go to an API server to fetch the data. So we're going to actually import Axios from Axios, just like we did for the front end. And we'll try to do axios.get a URL here, and then do something with it, just like we did in the front end. However, I can't do /API here because this is not a front-end trigger. I have to actually do the full server. But instead of hard coding any server host here, we should really read it from the configuration. So I'm going to go back to the config.js file. We've configured the port here. Let's go ahead and also configure the host. This would be env.host for us to be able to control it from the environment. And the default is, let's map it on 0, 0, 0, 0. This way it will bind to all the IPs on the machine, so we can actually test it from other machines. And let's also define a server URL. I'm going to make that into a getter, server URL. So this would return a string ready for us to use. This will be an HTTP. And in here, we're going to do this.host and then this.port. So this way, it's ready for me to consume directly as a property. So in server render, we'll need to import the configuration. So let's import config from ./config. This is a local file. And in here, our URL is $config.server URL and then /API/contests. And I want to make sure that this is working before we proceed. So response is, let's just console log response.data and see that working. I'm going to go ahead and import /server render just to trigger the code that I just did. And actually in the listen part here, when we listened to the port, we should also listen to the same host that we configured in our configuration. So config.host. This way it will bind to the same host that we have. So let me see all this working. And it looks like it is working. The npm restart here, I am seeing the data from the console log statement. So that's a good first step. In the next movie, we'll take this data and we'll pre-render our React components using this data and make it available directly with HTML.